Welcome to Mendezville Live, with something to talk about. Here is Rudy Mendez.
What's going on, Mendezville Live? Today I just got this camera angle. I forgot to set up the other one. It's all right. So today, let me see the mics here. We should be good. So today we are going to be talking and learning we're going to be talking about school board, what it takes to be on a school board, what kind of experiences a school board member has had. My guest was a school board member for many, many years. He's currently retired. So we're going to pick his brain a little bit, ask some questions, and if anyone has questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the comments. Today's broadcast was brought to you by For Life Together Building People, the Immune System Company, independent distributor Rodolfo Mendez. You can find Transfer Factor products at www.forlife.com/Rudy Mendez. Please, please, please help your immune system. Educate your immune system. Boost it. You got to boost your immune system. But either way, we're going to talk school board and what it takes to be on a school board. Seeing that we have, I've had some guests here, candidates, and I have a few more coming up this week. But today we're going to start with Mr. Amancio Chapa. How are you doing, Mr. Chapa?
How you doing, Rudy?
Doing all right. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy day. And I know it's late, so we won't be too long, but we just want to pick your brain a little bit.
Okay.
So can you just for the viewers, can you tell us? So how many years were you on the school board?
Well, I served a total of 22 years.
Oh wow, that's many years.
Yeah.
When was your first run at it, or when did you start?
I started straight out of when I got home from the university. I ran in 1971.
You're a Longhorn, right?
Right.
1971. That's a long time ago.
Long
You had to
time ago.
campaign and everything. That's with Billy Leo and all those guys.
Exactly.
So when you ran, so you win. How did that occur? Or what gave you the motivation to say, you know what, I want to run for school board?
Well, when I left La Jolla, I had stayed in touch with a man by the name of Leo J. Leo, who was a political figure in the La Jolla area. And because I had been very involved with the Chicano movement at the University of Texas, and one of the things that we were, as young Mexican Americans, were very concerned about was the condition of education for Mexican Americans throughout the state of Texas. Recognizing that in many parts of Texas, and still, even back then in the Valley, there was still a lot of discrimination against Mexicanos. Fortunately, in La Jolla, almost since its inception of the district, we almost always had a majority Mexican-American school board membership. There were some years where a significant number of Anglo-American board members did serve on the board. I'm not saying that they manifested any racism or anything like that, but we wanted to see what we could do about contributing. And one of the commitments that a lot of us that were Mexicanos that were up at UT at the time made was that we wanted to return to our home communities. So I had phone conversations with Mr. Leo. I'd go home for the holidays. We would talk, and I expressed to him that one of the first things I wanted to do when I got out of college was to run for the school board. And so when I got home with my wife and 2 kids, he reminded me of that immediately. And he said, "We got an election coming up." He said, I've talked to our committee. We would like to field you as one of our candidates. So obviously, I said yes. And I ran and got elected.
Nice. See, because the school board's elections are coming up, and I don't know if you've seen some of the people I've had on. I had Dr. Andy Lee Gonzalez, I had Irma Villarreal Veloz the other day. I have some more people coming up, and I always ask them, like, what was it that made you want to run for school board? And also, is that there's so many. There's like 3 or 4 people per seat this election.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I always ask, like, what is it you want to do? And also, I'm assuming that they're not too happy with the way it's running, but who knows? Can you give us some insight on like, so when you're in 1971, how many years did you do? One term, two terms? How did that go?
Okay, back then we had a gentleman's agreement within our political faction, and that was that basically after about 9 years on the board, you'd kind of step aside, give somebody else a chance.
Mm.
I did when I first got elected. I was elected president of the board immediately, and I served 5 terms, not 5 terms, 5 years in a row as school board president. But when I got to that 9th year, I was asked by Mr. Leo if I would consider running for mayor of La Jolla. This came as a surprise to me. That's something that I had not contemplated. I was very happy, very active on the school board. I was involved in some other educational ventures here in the valley outside of La Jolla, and I was very proud of my work on the school board, and it's something that I enjoyed. But Mr. Leo had asked me if I would consider running for mayor, and that's because he had just gone through a very close reelection, almost lost, and he thought that the next time it was up, that he may not make it, and he thought that maybe I would be a strong candidate, to run for mayor and keep the mayor seat within our political party. So when his 2 years were coming up, he said, "I want you to run for mayor." I did. I had no opposition, and I got elected mayor, and I served 2 years. And La Jolla was a very small city back then. There wasn't a lot going on city-wise. I mean, it was an interesting position. There was things to be done. We had federal monies that we had to administer, and it was only me as mayor and 2 city commissioners at that time. I wanted to get back to the school board. I really missed the action on the school board. I still felt there were some things that I wanted to do. And so after I concluded my first term as mayor, I informed Mr. Leo that I wanted to run for the school board again. He said, "Okay, you can do it." By that time, things in the city had settled down a bit, and I believe his son Billy decided to run for mayor. I ran for the school board, got elected again. I did another 9 years. So after that, that was 18 years. And then I got off the board because of the gentleman's agreement. I was out. I forget how many years I stepped out, but then I was asked to run again. I did. I put in, I think, another 4 years, and I stepped down when one of my sons, the girl that he was going to marry, had just started working for the school district, and she would have been affected by me being on the board. So by that time, I had already put in 22 years. I think I may be the longest serving board member in history, because I think the closest that came to me was Mr. E.B. Reina. And you're going way back into the 30s and 40s when he was on the board, and possibly the 50s, in the 50s, no, and the 60s, because I remember when I was a high school student, Mr. Reina was on the. I think he did a total of 19 years, but he was also a very powerful political faction in our district. Back then, there were just 2 factions, the Reinas and the Leos. And so, as I say, after I did those 4 years and got off the board, that would have been 22 years.
Wow, that's a long time. I'm sure there was a lot of accomplishments you had. Maybe some not turmoil, but disagreements you might have had. Before we go into that, let me ask you this. Right now, the city of Palmview is about I'm a big fan of trying to make sure that the city of Palmview grows, even though I don't live there. But I feel that my heart is there. That's the closest city I was part of when I was growing up. Can you tell me a little bit about, For example, La Jolla, why does it stay so small? How come La Jolla hasn't grown so much in the past 20 years, 30 years? Like,
You know what? I wondered that myself. I'm not exactly sure. I wasn't very involved with once I got off the city commission. Even though I lived in La Jolla, uh, uh, the times were different. We didn't have the expansion, the growth along the expressway. Certainly obviously the leadership in Palmview over the years has done a lot of things right. I think their proximity to Mission, I think the expansion of the expressway, the businesses that started coming in, the population growth also in Palmview
right.
really exploded back then. La Jolla wasn't exactly they really weren't that I can say boxed in, but a lot of the land that was north of La Jolla, which would have been prime for real estate development, was not there. I mean, the rancheros were holding on. You had the bandwidth to the west that had a big agriculture interest. You had several old families that had a lot of ranch land to the north of La Jolla, which they did not subdivide into subdivisions, for families to move in. I think in Palmview, once a lot of the citrus growers started uprooting their citrus trees after several freezes, then one of the biggest activities going on in that area was the sale of residential lots.
That kind of yeah, that makes sense. If the property owners don't give it up for residents, if they're ranchers or agriculture, because of course you can't. See, I had never taken that point into consideration.
Yeah.
That's why we got you here. The history book. It's good to know. So when you go into your first term, your first 2 years, what kind of challenges did you face? 'Cause, coming out of Texas and all that.
Okay, well, one of the first things I did, I obviously one of the things that was very noticeable in throughout the state of Texas, and even here in the Valley, even though Mexican Americans had always been the majority population, you're going to find that the majority of high school superintendents, high school principals, elementary principals, junior high principals were Anglo Americans. Now, I've never been anti-Anglo, don't get me wrong, but we had very qualified Mexicanos that were in the education profession, and it just seemed that they weren't being given these opportunities. And also, I felt that the image, the prestige of being a superintendent, of being a principal, of being an education leader, we needed role models for our kids. That we as Mexican Americans, especially educated Mexican Americans, could hold those positions, and also show a sensitivity. In La Jolla, what I could never figure out is why so many of the non-Hispanic teachers and administrators came from East Texas. And this is not to knock coaches, but I also wondered why so many superintendents and principals were ex-football coaches. So in my mind, my political beliefs, I wanted to see Mexicanos fill those positions. That's what I wanted. I wanted, for our kids in our district to be proud of the fact that we had professionals, that they could aspire, for higher positions, and that people would also demonstrate a sensitivity. I had a couple of discussions with, for example, the then superintendent when I first came in. And one of the things that I found out in a discussion with him, he had given us a report on federal migrant monies that we had there at the district. And we had, at the end of the school year, we had thousands of dollars left over. And he reported to the board that, this was a point of pride for him, that we had saved the government all this money when La Jolla, and back in those days, many, you might even say that maybe the majority of the Mexican American families that lived in La Jolla had a farm worker background or were still engaged, not only as seasonal farm workers, but migrant farm workers. So we had a very significant migrant farm worker population in La Jolla, as we still do today. But his deal was that, and so he was surprised that I was upset about that and complaining. He said, "Mr. Chapa, we just saved the government all this money." And I said, "Couldn't you have put it to use to serve more families?" He didn't have an answer. So it was
Right.
that kind of stuff that had gotten to me.
Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
It's interesting you mentioned that point about spending money, and I mentioned it in my last show when I had Eating My Here is I'm a fan of whatever federal money we get, we have to spend it on those kids, whether it be migrant. I talked about athletics, whatever it is. If we have the money, I mean, I think we should spend it. I don't know this thing about saving. I don't know how that works. Maybe I need to get more school board members. So how does that go when someone talks about saving money versus spending money on the students?
Yeah.
Was there like a fine line there, or am I missing something?
No, there wasn't. I had obviously conferences with my fellow board members. I was very fortunate when I was elected to the board. We've always had a very community based board. Back in those days, there were men. I don't think at the time that I was on the board, I don't think there was anybody else that was a college graduate. And I always maintained you did not have to be a college graduate to be a good board member. We were criticized for that, not only by people within our district, but people outside the district. That why was it that we had so few college graduates on the school board? These were hardworking individuals with a lot of common sense, and had the best interest of the children of La Jolla in their hearts and minds. And I learned a lot from them. But again, getting back to the Mexicano Chicano leadership issue, I had conferences with my fellow board members and with Mr. Leo, and I told him that I wanted to see if I could identify more progressive Mexican Americans. Unfortunately, I have to say this because back in those days, a lot of our folks tended to be a little bit, conservative. Maybe because in La Jolla, we maybe did not face out and out discrimination in the classroom. We certainly had. I think by that time when I came back, we had almost a majority. I think most of our teachers were Mexican Americans. But I had already, through my political involvement and my moving around Hidalgo County politically through the Raza Unida Party, and having been involved with Colegio Jacinto Trevino in Mercedes, Texas, I got to meet some very progressive uh, educators that were teaching it, like, for example, PSGA. And these were people that were starting to buck the system. They were starting to question why their school districts were not attracting more and more Hispanic teachers, more and more federal dollars to deal with low income families, with migrant families that had still controlled by very conservative superintendents.
Mm-hmm.
And so I discussed some of these individuals with Mr. Leo. He knew that there would probably be some resentment from local people, like why were we not? Because let me tell you, at first we're talking administrators. So my priority at the time was I wanted to have a Mexican American superintendent, and so I talked to three or four very knowledgeable, very progressive educators from the PSG school district, and eventually we recruited them over to La Jolla as superintendent, director of federal programs, high school principal. At first, there was three of them that came, and sure enough, one of the longtime principals that was there that felt that he should have been automatically the new superintendent. Um, and so, but we were able to do that. We got some very progressive individuals that did a real good job for us.
So then what happened to that principal? Did he quit?
Yeah, he did. He eventually he resigned. He made a statement that he would work for the new superintendent, but he wouldn't work for him or work under him.
Mm.
And and then eventually he moved on. He took it pretty bad. And there were some other mitigating factors that came into play that we had to deal with. I mean, I could understand the feeling, but again, in those days, we had to. Uh, it was about setting an example, and
Hmm.
you'd be surprised all of a sudden with some of the progressive moves that we did in La Jolla, and because of involvement of other very progressive Mexican Americans that were not being given a fair share in other school districts, they looked to La Jolla. You know, you have
Mm.
to remember that during the time that I was still at the University of Texas, we had a very significant incident that happened here in the Valley, and that was the student walkout at Ed Couch Elsa High
Mm.
School, where an Anglo control board, Anglo superintendent, Anglo principal, and the students there felt that they were not getting equal treatment in their school system, and they walked out.
Mm.
And the school board threatened to expel them. That if they did not apologize, if they did not go back to school and apologize to the powers that be, they would be expelled. And there were several senior students that would have missed their graduation because the deal was if you get expelled, you're not graduating, you're not getting the diploma, and if you even had the thought of
Yeah.
going to college, how can you go to college without a high
Right.
school diploma? And so, guess what school district stepped up to the plate to allow them to come to La Jolla? Those students that had been threatened and that had been expelled, La Jolla ISD, under
Mm.
the political leadership of Leo J. Leo and the then still school board that was part of the Leo J. Leo political faction.
Hmm. Well, that was good for them. I mean, they get to graduate. You know, and the biggest thing when we have these shows, and it's more being make sure that we're advocates for students. And I guess I know a lot of people that know you from the past. You're big. You had big movements with the Chicano movement, and you know you did your up in North and the Midwest, and you've done a lot. Your resume, we haven't even touched about the resume outside the school district, but it's interesting you mentioned about the role models, and I think that's important. And I think I see myself as a role model with my students, where I'm Hispanic, I'm from the area. I always talk about my UTSA, and then I go into my master's in Indiana State. I'm not saying I'm the only one, but it shows them that, hey, you know what, we can do it no matter where you're from. And it's funny you mentioned that because right now I have a student right now who's at UTSA. He was from like 5 Mile Line. He's working with strength and conditioning. I really hope he gets hired with us at La Jolla ISD with his knowledge. But I mean, I feel that he's going to get picked up really quick. And I'm sure there's many, many, many more hundreds out there of students like that. So I can see where you're coming from with that whole role model thing. Um, what other things? So you make a push to get the Mexican Americans into these positions. When you were there at the school board in 1971, was it just Nelly Junior High School at the time?
Yes.
At what point was it during that time that you moved to make the new high school, or not yet?
Yes, when I was on the within that 22-year period, yes, the new high school was built. I think by that time we may have added an elementary or two. I'm not clear. I don't think there was another middle school or junior high as we referred to them back then. But certainly the new high school, I was on the board at the time, and
But not the one that's not the high school from right now. I'm talking about the one right after Nelly
no, no,
Schuner.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
What?
And I think the one that's yes, the one that's there right now.
Both. You were
Oh
there in the
yeah,
school board for both.
yeah, yeah. And then going back, I think some of the I think I was still on the board when we were. It was basically under the administration of Dr. Miguel de los Santos that La Jolla ISD exploded population wise. I mean, we were growing by almost 1,000 kids a school year, and we were building elementaries right and left. I know because I think one time I went back to, just to see how many of the plaques, my name was on, and what other board members that I served with, were on those dedicatory plaques
Mm.
that they would put on the buildings. But then the growth kept going. After even after I was off the board, there was still another boom when that's when they built what is Lincoln, Palmview,
Yeah.
a bunch of new middle schools and elementaries.
Yeah. No, yeah, La Jolla's growing, and it's I'm sure Edinburgh says the same, and PSJ says the same. Let me ask you this. So, can you explain to us a little on, or explain to us the movement when you introduced the mariachi folklorico and all that fine art stuff?
Well, that was something that I always had in my mind even when I was in college. I wanted to do something culturally. As a matter of fact, one of the things I wanted to do, but was never really successful, and I and it wasn't. I didn't get like a lot of opposition from my fellow board members as much as maybe a lack of understanding. And I wanted to have Mexican American studies. I always felt that it was very important for our kids to learn the true Texas history, the
Mm.
involvement of Mexican Americans in the history of the Rio Grande Valley, of the state of Texas, and the United States. Because when I was at UT, we got exposed to all of this, to books, to
Mm.
professors that knew this history. This we never learned it, and as much as we had Mexican American teachers in La Jolla, none of them knew the history. They didn't talk to us about it, and they could have. It could have been an aside. It could have been an extra assignment if they knew, but that wasn't being taught at Pan American College. It wasn't, and the majority of our teachers were graduates of Pan Am, very fine teachers, but that kind of history wasn't there, and so I had that in mind. We were never able to do it. We came maybe a little bit close again under the administration of Dr. Miguel de los Santos when we hired an individual by the name of Richard Santos, who was a noted Texas historian from the San Antonio area. He knew a lot of the history of northern Mexico, about where our families were, a lot of the old families
Mm.
from La Jolla that were the original settlers that came with José de Escandón when he settled
Oh,
Camargo, Mier, and Reynosa.
fíjate.
Uh, this gentleman wanted to help us collect our local history, and then design projects for our teachers to be able to come up with projects to teach our kids uh, as one way of tying in Texas history with, first of all, let's find out what the history was when our people got here, when
Hmm.
the river was not a dividing border. It was simply a river that divided a piece of land that at one time belonged to Spain and then belonged to Mexico, and
Really?
then became part of the state of Texas. So we had a lot of that. So I wanted to do that. Uh, there was some uh, there was some resistance, and I hate to say it. So a lot of the resistance came from the teachers, our own Mexican American teachers, and that manifested itself by saying they had too much to do. This was going to be extra work for them to do. They didn't understand why this man had been hired, to try to collect this information, that he was going around the community interviewing people trying to interview elderly people, get their stories, get their family histories, and I think our administration kind of took their eye off the ball for a little while, and they didn't keep up. So then some of my fellow board members started questioning what this gentleman was doing. They were getting a lot of input from their compadres that were teachers, and so that project came to an end. I'll share with you one other thing that disappointed me. And here again, it came from our local teachers. When we built the new high school, the one that's there next to the Performing Arts Center, when we built that high school, uh, Mr. Leo was still alive. He brought in the political committee that we had, and he brought in the school board members. We had a discussion. He wanted to name the high school after Jose de Escandon. He had all the history on it, and uh, I will never forget. We When the word got out that the board was contemplating naming this brand new high school, and I think at the time there may not have been uh, any high school in the valley named after a Mexican American, and especially somebody with the history, and that so many of our La Jolla based families
Right.
uh, came from. That there was a student uprising. I remember Mr. Leo and I was president of the board. Mr. Leo asked me to accompany him to a general assembly of the student body and the faculty uh, to explain why we were going to name that school after Jose Escandon. I was appalled at the react. The students were, why did we have to be the first school district in the valley to have a school named after a Mexicano? Why did it have to be that name? Um, there was a lot of booing that went on. I mean, a lot of turmoil. I found out later that the students had been stirred up by a couple of our teachers, uh, several teachers, but two in particular. I won't mention their names, but uh, Mr. Leo and I were just disheartened. I said, you see, this is the problem that we've got. This is the problem we have to address. That, all right, several years later, there's an article that comes out in the Monitor about Jose de Escandon and about Las Porciones and all the families and the settlement of the valley and all of that. And then I start getting approached by some of our own Mexican American teachers saying, Mr. Chapa, is that the man that you all were talking about? Yes. But the difference was there was an Anglo historian from Stark County,
Uh-huh.
Florence Scott. She wrote the article. She wrote a book about Las Porciones. Oh, yeah, because Florence Scott said that Escandon was a historical figure, but not Leo J. Leo, not Amancio Chapa.
Right, right,
You
right.
could not believe them, but you could believe this other lady. And
Yeah.
so I said we still have a long way to go.
Well, sir, when you say las porciones, what are you talking about there? What is that?
The porciones were lands that were given on both sides of the river to families, to some of the first pioneer families of that the settlers that came with Escandon.
Oh, I
And then
got you.
and then these were big tracts of land that went from the river maybe 14 miles north. I forget how wide they were. Um and this was land that was given. The settlers had to make an agreement with the government that they would settle, they would build a church, they would build a plaza, they would farm, they would ranch, and they would protect that northern territory from incursion by Native Americans.
Mm.
And So, and then they had to prove that to a commission before they got title to their lands. So all the land in and around the La Jolla area that used to belong to a lot of, and some of the descendants of those original families still hold uh, title to at least portions of those porciones.
Mm-hmm.
Basically from Abram, Texas to around La Habana. Those were las porciones de what they call las porciones de Reynosa Viejo, and then there were las porciones de Camargo,
Mm.
uh, and that's the way Spain and Mexico uh, divided up land among families.
I got you. Cool. So, okay, that's interesting. That Escandon. So La Jolla could have been Escandon High School or what? Is
Yeah,
that what the plan was?
it would have been Jose de Escandon High School.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that was the current high school or the one before? The
No,
one that
the current one, the one that is still La Jolla High School.
okay. Currently La Jolla High School.
Yeah.
All right, so tell us about the journey, how you brought in La Jolla was the only one with a mariachi and folklorico group for a while, no?
Yeah, we were the first, probably in South Texas. This was something again culturally that I had in mind. I had in my mind. I thought we needed to do, and I had always wondered why, for example, in our band program, I'm going to give Mr. Alex Sainz a lot of credit because when he was band director of La Jolla, he's the one that started playing Jalisco at
Mm.
the football games. He
Hmm.
introduced it and he did his own arrangement of it. Mr. Science was a graduate of Texas A&I Kingsville, and they had been using that as their fight song.
Ah, es cierto,
So
that's
then it
right.
got introduced here, and man, I mean, the community took to it. And then so I said, but yes, but yet in pigskin and UIL competition and all of that, our bands were playing all this marches from Germany, from Austria, from Europe,
Mm.
but nothing. We had a lot of marchas mexicanas, marchas Zacatecas,
Ajá.
and others, and then well, just studying music, orchestra, and all that. And I always wonder, well, is there something that says that we can't have like mariachi music in high school? If we can, we had a jazz band that was part of the band.
Mm.
We had a symphonic band. We had the marching band. Why couldn't we have a conjunto? Why couldn't we have a mariachi? And when I attended a conference in Austin, Texas. I think it was on bilingual ed, and we went to
Around what time was this, sir? Back in the '80s?
the 80s. Yeah, about the mid to early 80s. Uh, we had been in. We were taken to a magnet school in Austin, Texas,
Mm.
and I think that school was a performing arts high school, and
Mm.
that's when at that time the idea of specialized magnet schools was just coming into vogue. So we were having lunch, and all of a sudden, in comes this high school mariachi, and there are like four or five Anglo kids, maybe two Hispanic Mexican Americans, a couple of Asian American students, and I think maybe one or two African American students. I'm saying, what? A mariachi, and then not only that, not made up totally of Mexicanos.
Ey, si ellos pueden, ¿por qué
So
nosotros no?
exactly. So when we got back, I started asking, floating around the idea, and I asked Dr. De Los Santos what was the possibility that we could do. He said, "There's no problem." He said, "You get the board to approve it, I'll find the money."
Mm.
And that's all it took. So when I presented the idea to the school board, they all went for it. There were some people that had raised a question. The community's not going to go for it. And are you sure you really want that kind of music? I said, look, it's as much a part of our culture. I mean, we use it at our weddings, quinceañeras, funerals. Um, they weren't ready for conjunto. That back then was cantina music. So I laid off that, but we started it. We started that program. It caught on before you knew it. And let me tell you something. What I had in mind, my idea was bigger than for La Jolla. I wanted the idea of having culturally relevant music and arts to spread throughout the valley. That that was the idea I had in mind.
Pues let me
And
it,
sure enough, I figured that after we did it and people started showing up and we started having our concerts. And remember, our concerts were at the McAllen Civic Center.
yeah, I got to go
And
to some of those.
people from all over were coming to see him. I thought it was a slam dunk. I thought that because by that time, more and more school districts now had majority Mexican American school boards, and they
Mm.
had Mexican American superintendents and principals. There was about an 8 year gap between the next high school started a mariachi program, which really surprised me because I thought that it would be a point of pride for all school districts in the valley. Look at it now, but it
Mm.
took many, many years. Now, every school district in the valley has a mariachi, and they may not have a folklorico that we do, and none of them have put on the magnitude of concerts that we have put on. But they're there, they're proud. It has spread all over South Texas, and I take immense pride that La Jolla ISD was the leader in that movement.
Fíjate que it's interesting you said because you let the movement in Mexican American administration. Now it's the norm. And now the whole, like you're saying, you start the mariachi folklorico, and now it's across the valley in the whole state of Texas. I know I've been fortunate enough to go to a few when I was living out in San Antonio. Um, my friend was one of the promoters that worked with the Mariachi Vargas, and now the high schools compete over there. So that's
Yeah,
a pretty interesting show and event for high school students.
yeah,
Uh, so she's actually Laura. You know Laura. She's
yeah,
the godmother of Sophia. So
right.
yeah, is big into mariachi and stuff like that.
The
So
the other thing,
go
let me
ahead.
just make this comment because aside from that, uh, one of the other things was, can you imagine, and we've heard this from generation of student, our program is over 30 years old.
Mm.
So you can imagine the generation of kids that have gone through both the mariachi and the ballet folklorico and also all of our fine arts programs, all of our athletic programs. Generations of students. Their dad was in football, their mother was in folklorico, their mother was in choir, they were in band, and just generation after generation. But to get on that stage and play and have an audience clap for you and give you standing ovations. Do you realize what that does to the self-esteem
Oh
of,
man,
of
absolutely. I mean, a lot of my research and the studies that back in Indiana State and the coaching and sports and extracurricular activities coming from a background of a campus recreation, we know that one of the main things in student success is what holds students at the university level to get that pride, and it's being part of something. And I'm sure for high school, the same thing. You're part of, whether it be fine arts or athletics or something, but you're part of the school, and it makes a big difference.
one of the observations I also made, and that's also what prompted me to really push the arts, because it wasn't only mariachi and folklorico, but uh, while I was on the board, you see, this tells you about the power that school boards have. I mean, you control the purse. You can present ideas. Yes, you let the educators educate, but you can also bring up ideas, and then the educators can run with it. Uh, was the development of a fine arts department. We
Mm.
didn't have that. We always
Oh,
had
it
we
wasn't.
always had an athletic director, and a head football coach, and sometimes they were both. But there was always somebody representing athletics at the school board for budget, for equipment, for issues of concern, whatever. And yet we had band, we had choir, we had orchestra, but we had no director, we had no advocate. And so that's another thing that I proposed to the board was we need to set up a, why don't we have a fine arts department and somebody that comes with a fine arts budget? Well, that got approved. Mr. Alex Sines was hired as our first fine arts director and did a tremendous job. Very proud of the work that he did. But there again, and then the other thing I fought for was I felt that that the fine arts director had to be at the level of the athletic director. And it was for a while, unfortunately. And I'd said under one of the administrations, it was knocked down a peg. The board did not think it was comparable to an athletic director. So that position was just knocked down one peg, which really disappointed me. But the other comment I was going to make about the arts and about that auditorium and being up close with your audience and having them after every show, not just somebody acting the folklore, but when the choir puts on a show, when the band does their concerts, when the dance program does their shows, and when the theater program does their shows.
El conjunto. They have conjunto now.
Yeah. The people in the audience wait in the lobby to pat these kids on the back and tell them how great they are. And one of the things that hurt me to the quick when I was a board member is sitting in the stands on a Friday night at a football game and see when one of our players flubbed, fumbled, got a pass intercepted, we lost the game, the fans booing them, yelling at them from the stands, yelling out to the coach, "Sáquenlo! Sáquenlo!" And the kids could hear that.
Yeah.
The kids on the side could hear that. I said, no, that is uncalled for. And so that's kind of like how my philosophy played itself out on the board.
Well, sir, I mean those are great accomplishments, and I'm sure many students. I mean, so there's a comment right here from a former person. I think I don't know if he was in Folklorico. Yeah, he was Folklorico Tabasco. I'm sure they all had great experiences, and you were one of the forefront of getting that movement going during your time at school board. Because this is see, well, first of all, I'm your daughter's husband, but since I moved back to the Valley, 2011 there's always the notion or the story of people run together. For example, the current school board, they started together 4 years ago, and now they're split. How often did you get opposition, or did you guys get upset with each other, or how did you handle the negotiations? For example, the Fine Arts building. I know you shared a little bit about the football and the cafetorium. Can you give us a little bit of insight on how you managed that, being on that board with those situations?
Yeah, right. Okay. Let me. I'll go very quickly again in history. When I came back from the university, there were two factions. Again, as I said, the Reina and the Leo faction, and there were some bitter political campaigns that went on. But once the things settled down, and as a matter of fact, Mr. Reina and Mr. Leo made their peace with each other. There was a period there, several years, of continued opposition. Like Leo took over control of the board, I think, in about the mid '60s. He had tried year after year to his slate would challenge the Reina slate, and always lost. And then finally they got closer. The elections got closer until finally the Leo faction did take over, and I think we had almost, gosh, I could be mistaken, almost a 40-year history of when the board was under control of the Leo faction. I like to think all of a sudden things got calm. There were a couple of times that there was opposition, not a lot. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we did during that period of time, uh, as things moved out in our district, we had a lot of people in the district from the Reina faction, because that was always the deal back and forth. To the victors go the spoil, and that happened all over the valley. It wasn't just La Jolla. A new board came in from the opposite faction. All of a sudden, you got new principals, some new teachers. It just,
People get moved
that didn't make it
around.
right, but that's the way it was. But then we even got criticized many, many years later, as I say, when things settled down. Some diehard of our Leo supporters were saying, "My God, you're hiring more Reina people than you're hiring Leo people." And by that time, we weren't even looking who was Reina, who was Leo anymore. Uh, so
So you're
things
just looking at
settled.
what qualified people that are good at working.
Exactly, exactly. And I think we did some other symbolic things along the way to show the community that we wanted to unite the community, that the old Leo Reina wars were over.
Mm.
Then when it came time for the auditorium, that was again, golly, there was an idea I had in my mind. I'll tell you where I got it. We went to a meeting at Edinburgh, and they had this real interesting setup. Because remember, back in those days, all we had throughout the valley was cafetoriums. But look
Hmm.
at this. Look at, and some other schools may have had it. Even in the old Nellie Junior building, we had an
Mm.
auditorium with a stage
Mm.
and theater seats in it. It was a small
Really?
auditorium,
Uh huh.
but we had it. And then, so I always had in mind uh, uh, that I wanted a freestanding auditorium, because after that, then every school district had a cafetorium. So
Mm.
if you were going to have a one-act play or something like that, it was in the cafetorium. So they started building like these little stages at somewhere within the cafeteria area.
Is
Uh,
that why our cafeteria is like that? The three levels and then the
no,
stage.
no, that was the old La Jolla Auditorium. It was bent, and then they did that side one. I think when they expanded the cafeteria.
Mm.
But no, our in 2000, around 2000, actually, we came up with the idea, and then I think we opened it in around 2002, or somewhere in there, maybe 2000. So we had just passed a bond issue,
Mm.
and we got a lot of opposition from. There was still a faction out there that was trying to oppose, and there was always a group of people that if you were going to raise taxes, they would, I mean, they'd come at you. So anyway, we passed a very large bond issue. I think it was to build. I don't. It may have been the current high school. I think a couple of middle schools and some elementaries. And um, then at the time, I don't know if Dr. Zamora was superintendent at the time. Right around that time, we found out that there was a pot of money that school districts had been competing for at the state level. It
Mm.
was for low income school districts that had high populations of low income families, moderate to low income families, high at risk. In other words, dropout rates, migrant seasonal farm workers, families at the federal or at or below the federal poverty level. But it was very, very competitive. So we took a stab at it. This did not come from the board. The administration put the package together. It looked like we stood a very good chance because of our demographics and all the point factors that we had going for us.
Are you on the board at the time? At this
Yes,
time, or you're
I'm,
okay?
no, I'm on the board. And so then, uh, once once we found out that it was almost a sure thing, then I floated the idea of a freestanding auditorium because we had already gotten some plans, and in the plans was a fancier uh, cafetorium. That's what we were shooting from
Oh,
because
okay.
because we had seen at Edinburgh these kind of escalon down, and then you could put chairs and make it look like a theater,
Uh-huh.
and then at the end, at the bottom would be the stage. So it kind of it had
Oh.
that look of a theater, but still with during the school day, you had the cafeteria tables, and they'd fold them, get them out, put chairs whenever they would have
Oh,
a
so the
program.
performers would be on the bottom.
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, and there'd be a stage there.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's
So,
why.
so it's very
I
similar
think
to the one.
if
Is it
you
very?
look at
Go ahead.
if you look at that La Jolla High School, it kind of had that kind of look to it, and that's why there's a stage there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Right?
ask you. It's
Because
very similar to
it
La
was
Jolla's.
already in the plans. The plans had already been drawn, but then when this money came along and we got it, and I forget how many millions it was. It was in the millions. Uh, I threw out the idea. Well, how about a fine arts teaching facility with a freestanding auditorium? That was unheard of at the time. Nobody in the valley, not even South Texas, had an auditorium. I knew that freestanding auditoriums existed in North Texas in some of the
Mm,
wealthier districts.
mm.
They put the numbers to it. It was not going to cost our people any additional tax money. And as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, about 80% of the cost of that auditorium, which I think the cost of that auditorium came in at $9 million, but about 80% of that was paid for by free state money that we
Wow.
got, and we were able to build the mariachi hall, the dance hall, the band hall, uh, that whole complex where the TV station is, the drama, and so that got that was funded by that money, and so you can almost say the whole thing was paid for out of that grant money that we got.
That is awesome. I mean, I enjoy going to watch. I mean, we've watched Sofia there with Mr. Pepito. So kids really enjoy themselves down
Yeah.
there.
But
Uh,
I had one of the things that never happened, Rudy, that I I saw that as a a community facility. It belonged to obviously to the school board, but I envisioned that we would have adult little theater program, gente de la comunidad. You know, we knew that we had a lot of musicians in our district. That the adults would come and put on shows, that they would have talent shows, that they would do obras de teatro.
Sí.
It never really came about. I don't know why, but the building is still there. I think it still would lend itself to that. Uh, and because we were starting to get La Jolla was incorporated as a city, then all of a sudden Peñitas got incorporated, Palmview, and then later Sullivan. And I said, our communities out here are never going to have a civic center, but the school district can provide a civic center for our community, for all the community.
That's a great idea.
And
Yeah, that's a great idea.
that was one of the ideas behind, obviously the kids first,
Right.
but we had hoped that it would be,
Yeah,
uh, yeah.
when the schedule allows it and it's open downtime, because I'm
And
sure the
when it
building
got
doesn't get used all the
when it
time.
got built, it was a state of the art. It was the envy. It was the envy of every school district in the valley and South Tech. Administrators would come just to look at it. Um, it came very close to rivaling at that time the McAllen Civic Center and the Performing Art Auditorium at Pan Am.
No, see, it's nice. It's nice. So when you were part of the board when the stadium got rebuilt.
Yes.
How did that go? What is that
Oh,
like in the school board meetings?
let me tell you something that happened on the board. Around that time, I'm still on the board, but this time I'm the old time. I'm the
Mm,
old man on the board. We had some young board members that came on.
mhm,
Again, supposedly from our political faction, or at least their dads have been
uh-huh.
part of our political faction.
Okay.
I have to say that fiscally they were more conservative. I think I culturally I think a little bit more conservative, and so when the uh, I think uh, I don't think we could have used that state money that we used, because the money we used for the fine arts facility was because it was a teaching facility, and we had to
Mm.
prove that to the
Oh.
state. They had to
Okay.
come and check it out because they weren't sure. They
Mm.
were not going to just do an auditorium, and of
Yeah.
course, I don't think with that pot of money you could not do a stadium, but you could with I think bond money,
Mm.
with bond issue money, you could do your football field. So uh, some of my colleagues on the board, they thought, well, hey, we're building this big old auditorium. Why don't we go whole hog on the super duper stadium? And I didn't oppose it. I was for it, but one of the concerns that I raised, because I could already see the handwriting on the wall. Because remember, I said that we had already been undergoing this population explosion. I knew that we were very close to a second high school.
Yeah, because we
And
were
and
we
and,
were already
and
in what 4,000, 5,000
yeah,
students.
and then I said, and so the thinking that I wasn't even sure yet about a third, but certainly a second. I said, you know what's going to happen, because if you've ever attended some games at other districts that already have their second and third, look at how many people show up on Friday night for those games, because your population is split between,
Hmm.
so you're not going to pack that stadium the way La Jolla was packing them back then in its
Oh
heyday.
man, it
But
was yeah.
I mean, packing them, and so, and I brought that up, and I said, I think we better scale this down a bit. I mean, because they were talking big, and then they said, well, Mr. Chapa, maybe we need to look at the auditorium, see how we can scale that down. I said, okay, you made your point. So I backed off. And like I say, I wasn't opposed to a large stadium, but I did want, now, the thing that gets me,
Mm.
and I know it's a beautiful facility, and we all obviously are very proud of it. But what gets me, like, you watch the news every Friday night when the all the sports scores come in and all the little video clips and all that, and you see those cameras pan the stands, and there's just a small group of people in the middle,
Hmm.
of,
Yeah.
of those districts that have two, three, four high schools, because it's still one stadium, a huge stadium, you know. So ask yourself, did we need a 12,000 seat stadium back then? I mean, it did, as long as we had one high
One
school,
high school.
and
Yeah.
we were bucking, not going to a two, and
Right.
we were starting to, be a power to be reckoned with,
Right.
uh, you
Right.
know. But no, but I mean, it is what it is. It's there, but no, the everything went off fine with the auditorium. Certainly everything has gone off fine with the football stadium. But now, it's with a lot of school districts, it continues to be one upmanship. Who's got the biggest scoreboard? All
Ah,
this
see,
stuff.
yeah.
Who's got the biggest stadium? And also brought a lot of prestige to us, because we started hosting pigskin, big events. There were a couple of things there. We started hosting Mexican soccer games, and
Mm,
there was
yeah. Yeah.
potential.
Yeah.
There was a potential to do just like I thought. Well, maybe for a while there were even theater groups that were traveling around the country that, they couldn't afford the McAllen Civic Center. Somebody would say, well, maybe you can put your theater, your drama. These were traveling groups out of New York City,
Mm.
other places, and a couple of them, put on their shows at our auditorium. So
That's pretty cool.
yeah,
Sir, so when we have, so let me ask you this. So you talk about factions, the Billy Leo, or the Billy Leo, right? The Leo
well,
faction.
he inherited the leadership from his dad. Once Mr. Leo passed away, it was still the Leo faction. Billy had a lot to do with it.
Mm.
I never, when I was on the board, I never experienced from Mr. Leo and certainly not Billy, where as board members we were told what to do, we were told how to vote. Never did I
Mm.
experience that in my 22 years. We
Right.
would
And
we would have meetings of our faction to
right.
discuss certain things, how we would approach, how we would try to sell a bond issue, if we were going to bring in a new federal program or a new program or something of that nature. But we didn't mess with the superintendents. Uh, 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 so I was that's something I took a lot of pride in.
Right. So, and I guess there's two questions now. It's what advantages are there when your faction is in? No, I don't like to say the word control the school board, but it's majority in the school board. What can you explain that? Like, what kind of advantages are there?
Well, I'm sure that to a certain extent, uh, uh, you have to realize these are political elections. They go on all over the state of Texas.
Yes.
We have had our fair share of criticism since back in the Reina and Leo wars, in the 50s, the early 60s, and we were smeared with this paintbrush that we had corrupt politics in La Jolla. The same deal was lodged against Rio Grande.
Yeah.
Some
Oh
other.
yeah, those headlines are all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, when there would be a change, as I pointed out, in a political faction, certain people, employees got favoritism. They got promotions. They whatever. That wasn't always the case. I mean, not in all cases. But hopefully, what you hope for, that even if you did help somebody locally, that they had the credentials. That had to be an important factor, and it
Right.
wasn't just the fact that they were local, that they were related to a board member. You couldn't be there. There's still nepotism laws in Texas. They've been eased up a little. Back when I was on the board, they were very strict. Um, and one of the advantages, I guess you could say, is that well, one, you get to pick your leadership team. Hopefully, you pick your superintendent and you let them pick their leadership. That's the way it should be. And I think now, if I'm not mistaken, TEA takes a much closer look at school boards that start dictating to their superintendents and trying to micromanage their administration.
Right.
So aside from that, hopefully one of the things can be is that if you've got a good philosophy, a good feel for your community, it shouldn't be about political power. Unfortunately, in all too many cases, that's what it is. That's how it's seen. So that people have to come up to you, especially for the blue collar jobs, so that people then are beholding to you because you got them the job. They have to go to the board member to
Mm.
be a bus driver, a teacher aide, a janitor, things of that nature. Maybe get a relative in. Um, and sometimes there's nothing wrong with that, again, as long as people are qualified. But by the same token, that should not be the overriding factor. And hopefully, there are still the Mexican American community in Texas is still beset with a lot of problems in education. Even though we control the boards, we control the superintendencies, and that question continues to be asked. Well, now that you all are in control of it, why do you still have high dropout rates? Why, there's been a lot of progress has been made. I think in our district, a lot of progress. We've had some great superintendents, great administrators, good teachers. I don't mean to demean that, but we still have high poverty levels, high uh, incidents of at-risk kids, uh, issues that need to be dealt with. And you need to have a very progressive looking board to advocate for our kids. And some of this stuff, that we're all aware of because the state of Texas, unfortunately, does not write things that it does wrong, like funding equity in education. They have to be sued in
Mm,
order to get some semblance of equality in educational funding. They had to be taken to court because they fought it tooth and nail.
really?
And the state school board, uh, there are still not even a handful. I think there's maybe two or three Mexican American Hispanics on the state school board, the ones that set policy for education, philosophy, and all that in the state of Texas. The ones that pick the textbooks, decides what goes in the textbooks. Whether look at how they fought, having ethnic studies in the public schools of Texas. They fought it tooth and nail. They did not want Mexican American studies, and one lady that was the chairman at the time, had the gall to tell one of her fellow Mexican American school board members, Mary Helen Berlanga, well, Miss Berlanga, when you all control the board, you can do what you want. But right now, we control. So
That's not
we still
cool.
have a lot of that. We still have a lot of that. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we have an increasing number of Mexican Americans that are very, very conservative when it comes to that. I'm not talking about conservative when it comes to national politics or whatever, but just, again, we don't need this. We don't have to address these issues anymore. Uh, but if you look at a lot of the prominent advocacy organizations that continue to advocate for the civil and human rights of minority populations. Uh, we still have problems in Texas. We've come a long way, but those problems are still there, and we would do a disservice to our students, especially now. For if I'm not mistaken, we're very close to to where the majority of the kids in the public schools of Texas are of Hispanic descent, or going to be of Hispanic descent, and those numbers continue to grow. And so we need to make sure that the education we give them is relevant to them, instills a sense of pride in them, and opens up those opportunities to be gainfully employed and stand an equal chance to continue to go to the college and university of their choice.
Man, I guess you kind of answered my question there because my next question was going to be something in the lines of what kind of advice would you give the current school board members, and maybe if any of the new candidates do win, is what from your experiences, like how to manage that?
Well, all I would say is, I hope and I do believe that basically, I think the members of the school, their heart is in the right place. They want the best for our kids. I think that one of the things you have to do also, you've got to look beyond the borders of La Jolla ISD. I know that superintendents bring in new ideas, new philosophies, and they'll tell you, look, this has been tried in this school district. This has been pride in this part of the country continue to explore uh, things that have been proven to work, and especially things that have been proven to work with students that fit our ethnic population. We cannot close our mind to the fact that we continue to get students that are first, second generation in this country that are aspiring for what all students want. Their parents want the best for them. We need to be sure that education that's given to them is relevant to them. That again instills that sense of pride in them, and that we do look beyond, and we look to network with organizations that advocate for this rising number of Hispanic students that make up the entire population within the public schools of Texas. That is very important because the future of the state of Texas is going to depend on an educated Mexican American Hispanic population because of the numbers. This is where the future workforces come from. They need to be properly educated, motivated, and cared for. And the same thing is going to go eventually for the United States. That we are rapidly becoming, that we are already the largest minority population in the country, and will continue to be. And so the United States is going to depend on our kids. So that has to be uppermost and foremost in any school board member's mind. I'm encouraged, in a sense, by the fact that there's so many young people now that want to run for the board. That's good. I will be honest with you. I'll tell you that I know that shortly while I was on the board and shortly after I got off the board, I was to a certain extent disheartened when I felt that many of our new younger board members were very conservative at heart, had very conservative ideas, didn't think in terms of like uh, 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 that maybe didn't see things in terms of, okay, we're still dealing with certain discriminatory practices within the education system of Texas. Maybe not necessarily for La Joya, because we never, that I know of in our district, there was never blatant out and out racism against Mexicano kids that the way it was in other Valley school districts. I will tell you though, there was an incident in the 1930s when a group of Anglo-American families from within our district presented a petition to the La Joya School Board to have an Anglo school teacher contract not renewed. Why? Because she was dating a Mexican American gentleman from one of the historic Mexicano families in our district. And if the board did not terminate her contract, they would pull their kids out of the La Joya schools and send them to Mission. Of course, that was the 1930s.
Yeah, that was a way back, and that
was way back. But it just goes to show you, and they did. The board did not, unfortunately. Two Mexicanos from our school district on the board voted not to renew her contract. And then about a year or two later, she's back on the payroll with the same board members that didn't approve her. I mean, but though that's just a story, and I mean that's what I mean. We still cannot let our guard down, because some of the political rhetoric that's being spouted out from the national level now, I think is threatening to Mexican American, to Hispanics, to African Americans and minority population in this country. Power is not going to be given up easily, and this is not again about power struggles. It's just that preparing our kids for the world of tomorrow, our grandkids and great grandkids who have to play an increased role in the economy and the culture of this state and this country.
No doubt about that. You're right on the money. There's a big divide right now nationally. I think we're very fortunate in the area where, I hate to say it, but I don't worry about it that much with my kids, with your grandkids and everyone else in the area because it's a very homogeneous population. We're a lot of Hispanic. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some blacks and there's Anglo-Americans or whatever, but for the most part, it's mostly Hispanic. When it comes back to the school board and the budgeting, I know I asked this to some of the new candidates, and I was, in one of my Facebook threads, and the city of Palmview wants to lower taxes by, I think it's half a cent or a cent, which I think won't help the city that much. And people have already told me, like, we already know where you stand on taxes. And I've come to the conclusion over the course of the last month and a half where people started telling me, well, you don't want taxes, property taxes. And I don't mind taxes. I really don't. I think it's, especially when the whole commissioner race with Mr. Villarreal and Joe Flores, and it's, if you're going to charge me a certain amount on taxes, I'm a fan of, well, I want to see where my money's going. Like, I want to be able to visualize it. Do you think that at some point we have too much administration and not enough teachers and more budget for students, or is how can we work that out?
Obviously, that's always been one of the arguments. If you look at education across, again, Texas, or especially in states where the school budgets are based on property taxes, you're going to have your biggest cost is administration and teachers. Now, teachers, you can say, well, they're not administration, but they're the cogs in the wheel that drive.
Yeah, teachers. Yeah, the teachers.
Cannot have a system without teachers. And then you get the criticism is that, well, you're top heavy with administrators. Well, I know the state has a formula. If you start getting too top heavy in administration, they'll let you know, and they'll come down on you. The state will if your administrative salaries are out of line, if you're really top heavy with very high ticket price tag administrators, they'll let you know. But I think I think in the administrative budget, I'm not going to say it doesn't have an impact, but it's more, you want to make sure that you're not squandering money on things that either don't work or could be folly or whatever. Because yes, every dollar could be plowed into another computer, more educational tools, and it should be. But it's a balance because you also need that leadership there. And the ultimate safeguard is supposed to be in here is where, like, the state of Texas se la quita con esto. And it's always, hey, if you think your school board is misspending money or squandering money or whatever, you're the voters. So the people don't turn out to vote. If they take things for granted, if they don't raise questions, if they don't take the time to know what's going on at the board level, what decisions are being made, if they're apathetic and the deal is, well, we elected a school board, let them run it the way they want. That's what we elected them for. But if there's issues that are maybe a little controversial, that raise eyebrows, then, and if you do not vote, they're not going to fix it for you unless there's out and out fraud. Then you might have branches of the government. You might have TA come in You might, and TA has taken control of certain school districts in the state, taken control away from the boards. I mean, that's extreme, extreme.
Right.
There's not that many cases, but there are. Uh, then the FBI and other agencies, that's if there is fraud going on or something illegal. But ultimately, when there's those kind of local controversies or whether they should have done this with the money or they shouldn't have done that, TA's just always going to say, well, that's for the local taxpayer to, the local voter to deal with.
Right.
And if you didn't get out, that's how you fix problems at the local level. And that's the way. And I think it is unfortunate, but in a true democracy, uh, politics should be at the local level. Smarter men than me. There's an old saying that I think Tip O'Neill made when he was Speaker of the House. He said, "All politics is local." So the closer you get to the grassroots level, the local level, that's where the people are given the chance to control. Uh, the All budgets are subject to scrutiny by the taxpayers. You have the right to go ask questions, to look at the budget, how it was put together, why it was voted on this way or that. And as you say, you want to see what your tax dollars being spent on. You have a right to ask those questions. And if you don't get it locally, you go to then if it's at the county level, if your commissioner won't give it to you, you go to the county. They have to divulge this information to you. That's under freedom of information. Um, and the same thing applies for school districts. If you want to know how much is being spent on athletics, on computers, on fine arts, on fixing up buildings, on rehabbing, on construct, whatever it is, salaries, people's salaries, are they comparable with the salaries in other districts? And most districts have to do that. You have to they have to make sure that they stay in line. You can't just be raising salaries, of certain people willy nilly, just because they're your friend, they're your compadre, and of course, friend and compadre, that doesn't come into play because they don't fall under nepotism, and it's a very hard case to make when you say, oh, well, he's this guy's compadre, that's why he got that job, and that's why they gave him that raise. Well, TA is not going to look at compadrismo unless there's something really underhanded that went on. But no, so just be vigilant as a taxpayer. Make sure everything's up on the up, and hopefully there'll be enough transparency. I wish that all of our district. I don't think it's still there. One of the things that I try to get when I was in fine arts, because for a while there I had the TV station under the fine arts department, and I wondered why our signal, our TV station, was not going out to the entire district, and it was just pockets where it was. And then I found out the reason why is that the cable companies, they make contracts with the city, with a local entity, because they have to set aside at least one public access channel, maybe two, I think, one for the city and one for the schools.
Okay.
And so, if I'm not mistaken, back then, I don't know if the laws have changed, but the La Jolla School District was getting their ability to broadcast into the community through the contract that was granted to the city of La Jolla, because the cable company had a contract with the city.
I see.
I think not with the school district. Things may have changed, but still, out here where I live, there used to be Channel 17, and it almost used to be that every school district channel was Channel 17.
Yeah.
Because that was the channel set aside. And so Mission had it theirs and whatever. And then people in the rural areas, you didn't get it. So what good does it do that the school board meetings are being broadcast on the local TV station if the majority of your public doesn't get to see it.
Yeah, and that's true. But I think now with the technology, I know
Yeah,
there's a
we
way
can
to.
stream it. I think you can stream it
Yeah,
now
you can.
and all
People
that. Yeah,
people
that,
watch it.
that-
I know.
yeah,
I,
that's changed. That's true. That's true.
I am a fan of the city of Palmview that they put it on Facebook.
Yeah.
I know La Jolla ASD. You have to click on to. I can't even get. I have not taken the time to go and look at those meetings live. I know I have to go down into the web page and click something else. Where Facebook is just, you become a friend and they're there. But whatever, they are accessible for the public if they want to watch them.
Right.
Transparency is interesting. You mentioned that. I always tell people in the past few weeks or days that I've been interviewing the candidates is I push. I mean, maybe you can answer this question for me. Is there a way where now with Facebook and all this social media is Twitter and all these things can or who would be in charge of making the decision of, hey, you know what? From now on, we're gonna post how we voted on what contracts, who got the contract. That way, for or against, and also make the budget. The budget is accessible. It's just very hard to read.
Yes.
Is there any way we can make a movement to make it easy, more user friendly to the reader, to where not that you can or can't, is who decides that?
Well, the board decides that because it's all public information, and that's what I mean about being forward thinking, being transparent. Because you can go with the technology that's out there, but you should be looking for ways to make it very common sense to the public, and it might take an extra effort, but I certainly think that all school boards, not just
that's a very general. All school boards,
all governmental agencies should be looking for ways to make their information easily accessible. There's all kinds of games that get played. I remember when I was on the board, we'd get a freedom of information request to the administration. I'd like to think that we were open, but I do remember at times when I was no longer on the board, and then all of a sudden I find out, and because there are kind of like some limits, because you can get people, there are people out there in all communities. They'll be there every day. And they're asking you for hundreds, thousands of copies, and they want the district to pay for it. Now, technically, in the beginning, under freedom of information, all that had to be done. But then governmental entities started complaining to the state and to the courts, hey, wait a minute, we can't be running off 1,000 sheets and then tying up all these workers, to here's this person, and here's these 10, 20 people that come in once a week or whatever. And, but there has to be ways, and especially now with so much, that was back when you'd have to Xerox it and whatever. But now
you can email it. You can email it now.
And so now with almost every person, walking around with a phone in their hand, obviously, I think every governmental entity should look for as many public venues that are out there to get their information out. Now, things like who got the contract, what now? There's still executive session, things that have to do with sensitive issues of budget, personnel issues, contract negotiations are still privy and protected by that. The entities have to keep a record of it for so long in case they are required in court, and they're not that kind of info is not readily available to the public. That would take, I'm sure, an act of the state legislature to change that, but certainly just open discussions. And a lot of times, a lot of boards do this, is they'll have all their arguments back there, rationale of why they picked that contractor. Then they come out into public session and just take the vote. And and uh, and then there's this deal where, aside from the public comment section, uh, which is very limited in scope, and if you don't get your name on that list,
Mm,
and then they are under no obligation to engage you in a
mhm,
discussion
mm.
and start debating with you and rationalizing because they're saying, because the state says they have the ultimate authority.
Right.
So, but any board that cares about its citizens should take the time to educate them. And I know that one of the main complaints, and it happens even from some of the best meaning boards there are, is all it takes is a couple of individuals that constantly show up and want to eat up all that time and whatever. And they'll say, well, we can't conduct business because, this
Right.
we can't get these people to stop talking. So
Mhm.
that's why they start limiting the deal. But there has to be ways. Either maybe you can devote a whole special session just to public, maybe every now and then, some public forums, just the way the candidates do. When
Yeah.
that, when they have those public forums, in caucuses or whatever, to allow people to talk and ask questions. And you should give them as much info and not hide behind the cloak all the
Yeah.
time of executive session or I can't engage you in conversation.
Right.
So so yeah, but the bottom line is that's determined by the board itself, and some of it
The
is
board president.
determined by certain state laws.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. So, but if someone wants to make a push, it's gonna come down from the school board members. I guess kind of like what you did with the push with the fine arts and all these things. So let me ask you this. So right now, there's a big negative or a stigma going on, and not just La Jolla. This is because, like I say, I'm a referee. I talk to other people that work like me. We're educators, but we like to referee games. And even Mr. Jerry Lanise, I'm gonna have him here tomorrow night. He's currently he's a football official, so you get to meet different educators from the different area, and the negative stigma, or it's just a bad vibe right now. Is the whole school boards, quote unquote, they're working the magic on contracts to get kickbacks or whatever it might be. Can you give us a rundown of how you guys and all the boards you run? How did you go through the process of giving contracts to different entities?
Well, I mean, there's some basic rules. First of all, it has to be to the lowest responsible bidder.
Mm,
And if you don't go with the lowest responsible bidder, no matter what the contract is, you've got to document and substantiate, especially if you're challenged by somebody that brings in a lawyer or the state questions it, why you didn't go. And a lot of times, uh, that's where the key is. The lowest responsible, and then you say, well, yes, this was the lowest bidder, but look, we've got proof here that they messed up this contract at another district.
mm,
They did this. There's these complaints about them. Da 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 da. I mean, we're now. I wasn't on the board when. Well, I mean, I guess the last time when we did that last bond issue, but things seem to be very cut and dry back then. Um, we interviewed two, three, four potential candidates. You looked at their background. You had them checked out. Uh, I'll tell you one thing: if there were kickbacks from somebody that was on the board at the same time I was, I'm not aware of it. There, of course, there'd be allegation. There was always allegations, that they gave Leo money or whatever, and that was never proven. We never had any FBI snooping around on that kind of stuff. That uh, people, mostly opposition, would raise those kinds of issues. Uh, I think I don't know. The one thing I do know is that the feds, for some reason, seem to bide their time. A lot of times when there's suspicion that something might be going on, and you say, "Well, why haven't they acted?" I mean, or you feel, I mean, nobody ever knows for sure because the companies are going to cover themselves up. Because if they're implicated in it, or they use a third party, who gets a finder's fee, or they hire as a consultant, and that party also is a political leader or whatever, and can funnel money to other people or campaigns, you know. But you know what? I'd say, but that's the American political system. They do it big time in Washington D.C. Shell companies, offshore companies, and huge contracts, and that money finds its way back to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, big time. That's the way the game is played. It's unfortunate, but that is the hypocrisy of the American political system. Is that it is open to that, but you make enough mistakes, and unfortunately, sometimes, our people at the local level are not as sophisticated as those New York lawyers in creating enough layers that you can really hide the stuff. But we've seen local political figures at the county, state, and local level toppled, by federal investigations. You have to be careful because, they don't, you say, well, man, I've been doing it now for 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 years. I got away with it. And all of a sudden, 10 years later, here they come knocking, some raid on your office, your home.
Yeah.
They're carrying out all these boxes of papers. So,
And see, that's where I go with the whole, the political system. And you mentioned how that one person said it, politics, and it's at the local level, the voters make a difference. So it all goes back to my push or asking if at what point can we be a bit more transparent, make it more user friendly, more common sense of sharing, because the budget and the finances are public information. I looked at 4 different districts, and boy, are those things hard to read. And La Jolla was one of them, and they're all the same. They're all like, well, where's this project? Where's that project? I cannot read where there was this new project. Where are they? Right? So because, for example, at Mendezville ISD, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen my post. Mendezville ISD, it's every junior high has 8-lane rubber tracks. Well, an 8-lane rubber track costs about $350,000 más o menos. If you install, let's say us, La Jolla, you install 8-lane rubber tracks. Well, you're gonna see. I would like to see where somebody clicks into the budget and says, "Oh, there they are, 8-lane rubber tracks." What is it? 8 times 3, $240,000. Whatever. Something like that. But like I said, that's why I was asking you, who makes that move? Who makes the decision of making it more user friendly so the voters, the taxpayers can see where those expenses are? But like you say, it's at the national level.
It is the school board, and they have that authority. All they have to do is they instruct the superintendent to tell the director or the assistant superintendent of finance, look for ways to simplify. You have to have that doesn't mean you can't have this fancy, very complicated budget that they understand.
Right.
But you have to have a version of the budget that the general public understands.
Right. I like that. I think we should make a push for that. All right. So you mentioned the superintendent, and you mentioned how you guys, when you were on the board, you let the superintendent do their job. They run the show. They're the captain. I had Marco Suarez here the other day from McAllen, who they got the school board of the Region 1 or something like that. If a school board member or a superintendent says, you know what, I'm going to run the show like this. I'm going to run like this. These are my decisions. I don't want to get bullied by the school board. Who does the superintendent have to report to file grievances against their own school board?
It reported to TEA.
I see. That's just interesting because I mentioned with I think I had Irma here how the stories of puppet masters and or was it Linda Sarabia? I don't remember who it was, but we talked about how sometimes people control it and we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that. It's like just let the person in charge do the running. And it's interesting you mentioned at the beginning of the show was how some people always state of you have to have a college education, a college degree to and I think even with a college degree, it comes down to character and morals
Yes,
and what kind of decisions you're going to make, whether you have a degree or not.
yeah, because they don't teach being a school board member in college, even in government classes. They don't teach you. There's no university class for how do you become a mayor, how whatever. You learn how government works and all of that, and it takes uh, common sense, an inquisitive mind, dedication, read the material that's sent to you, attend the workshops, uh, go to the workshops that the state that are provided for you, your school board training, and try to be the best that you can be. That's what it takes. So no, a college degree is not the yardstick, for being a good school board member.
Right. I'm sure you've been there 22 years. I mean, you had 22 years on the school board. You were mayor of La Jolla. You served as a director of fine arts for how many years, Mr.
And
Chapa?
I was 10 years as director of fine arts.
Man, they should name you like Mr. La Jolla or something. Name a school after you or something. I swear. I mean, you made a big difference for many times. Mr. Chapa, I really appreciate the information. I don't want to take any more time. I'm sure the viewers enjoyed it. I'm sure we can go on, and I can ask you questions and more details. But for now, I think that's good enough. And hopefully some of the candidates saw it, some of the school board members saw it, and they can learn a little bit from your insight. I really appreciate it.
I want to wish them, all of them, luck, and hopefully keep your heart and mind in the right place.
Mr. Chapa,
Thank
thank
you.
you. You have a good night.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Mr. Chapa, Amancio Chapa. He was in the school board for many years. He was with La Jolla for many years. He graduated from Texas, big Chicano movement person. I mean, I sat down with the gentleman to talk, and he shares stories from in the Midwest and with the migrants and, all these things. And it's a very interesting individual to listen to. Hopefully some people that are watching or that watch it later tomorrow that they can learn some things. I'm sure I left out a bunch of questions that he's told me in the past and learning, and I've learned so much from him. So the man cares a lot, and he's coyote. Es coyote, and he's been a cow for many years. So the only thing I can advise people is out there is maybe change the name of the fine arts building to Mr. Amancio Chapa, or build another one under his name, or build a school under that guy's name because, man, his resume is all La Jolla. It's all La Jolla. So either way, one last message before I tune off. I highly encourage tomorrow. There's a meeting. There's a city meeting, the Palmview City meeting about raising tax or lowering taxes. If it's not going to be that much, City of Palmview, if it's not going to be that much savings for the individuals, I'm talking about $20 a year, $25 a year. Can we please keep the taxes the same? We need our city to grow. We need Palmview to grow. I mean, if you look at the finances, the interest, the loans, and all these things, we need the city to grow. I don't think we are where our mission is with the sales revenue. I don't think we are in the sales revenue compared to size and Palmer's. Please, elected officials that represent the community in the city of Palmview, please do not lower that city tax just yet. You got to wait 2-3 more years, please. Either way, so that's my message for tonight. Once again, this show was brought to you by For Life, Together Building People. It is the Immune System Company, independent distributor Rodolfo Mendez. You can find your Transfer Factor products at www.forlife.com/Rudy Mendez. With that being said, you guys have a good night. Take it easy.